I stamped my own name into the marriage lottery the same as everyone else in the building, because refusing wasn't a choice under the interspecies continuity accord, not for humans holding colonial residency, not for the last of the war-broken species queued behind reinforced glass on assignment day. I'd processed 400 pairings that spring alone, watched other men go pale or relieved reading a printout, and told myself none of it would ever touch my own file, because my compatibility index had sat at a flat, unremarkable 31 for 6 years running. Low scores got low matches. That was the whole design of the thing. Then my own name came back, paired with Kyrina Doll Ostrix, and the processing floor actually went quiet. She was warrior caste, one of maybe 40 of her kind left walking after the Ostrix collapse, decorated for actions I wasn't cleared to read the details of, and ranked at the very top of a scoring index none of us fully understood. Someone in records called it a clerical error, before I'd even reached the counter. 2 clerks laughed, not unkindly, just at the size of the mismatch. I laughed too, mostly out of nerves, and started drafting the appeal myself, because that's what a 31 does when paired against a name like hers. You get out of the way before anyone has to say it out loud. She was already standing at my counter when I looked up. The assignment hall runs 3 stories of frosted glass and fluorescent tube lighting, the kind that hums just below hearing until you've worked under it long enough to stop noticing, and every counter on the processing floor faces the same bank of intake terminals, so a queue can watch its own number climb in real time. Kyrina had walked past 40 numbers ahead of hers to reach mine directly, which nobody on that floor did, not for a clerk, not for anyone. She had a soldier's stillness, the kind that doesn't announce itself. Warm russet brown skin marked along one forearm with old service scarring, black hair cropped close to the skull, storm gray eyes with a vertical pupil that didn't blink nearly as often as mine did. She set the printed match sheet on the counter between us like evidence in a trial and said, "You were about to file against me." I told her the truth, because lying to a decorated war survivor seemed like a worse idea than the honest one. I said the number embarrassed me more than it embarrassed her, and that I figured she'd rather have someone who scored high enough to be worth her time. "The index doesn't measure worth," she said. "It measures paperwork convenience. I have read every study behind it. Would you like to hear how badly it fails at the one thing it claims to predict?" I said I would, mostly because nobody had ever offered to explain my own life back to me with that much precision, and she did, standing at my counter for 11 minutes while a line formed behind her that nobody dared to complain about. By the end of it, I hadn't filed the appeal. She hadn't asked me not to. She'd simply made it clear that walking away from a bad index score was its own kind of surrender, and she had opinions about surrender. The accord gave us 1 certification year to either formalize or dissolve the match, cohabiting under observation, and I moved my few boxes into the assigned unit above the hall, expecting 6 months of careful distance and a clean dissolution at the end of it. What I got instead was a warrior who couldn't sleep more than 4 hours at a stretch and paced the narrow unit at 3 in the morning like a cage thing, because the Ostrix discipline she'd trained under her whole life required a formal drill space, and the Accord's housing allotment hadn't budgeted one for a single decommissioned soldier assigned to a records clerk. I found her doing forms against the kitchen wall at 4 in the morning on the 9th night, silent, controlled, furious in a way she wasn't showing on her face. I didn't say anything about it then. The next morning I put in a requisition for the unused storage annex on the hall's lower level, the one full of decommissioned filing cabinets nobody had cleared out since before the war, dust an inch thick on cabinet drawers still labeled with pre-accord case numbers. Facilities approved it in an afternoon, mostly because nobody else wanted the paperwork of clearing it themselves. I spent 4 evenings after my shift hauling the cabinets out on a hand truck, one at a time, down a service corridor that hadn't seen foot traffic in years, and scrubbing decades of grime off a concrete floor that had never been meant for anything but storage. I bought a proper drill mat with money I didn't really have to spare, the kind rated for repeated impact rather than cheap gym stock, because I'd looked up Ostrix footwork long enough to understand it would wreck anything less. I lined the walls with the only mirrors the surplus depot had in stock, mismatched sizes, because a soldier drilling blind against her own reflection seemed worse than a soldier drilling against mismatched glass. I didn't tell her I was doing it. I just left the door unlocked and the light on. She found it on her own the following night. I heard the mat take her weight, heard the controlled, unhurried rhythm of a drill she'd probably run 10,000 times before I was born, and I sat on the stairs outside and didn't go in, because it wasn't mine to watch. When she finished, she came and found me on the steps and didn't say thank you, because I don't think the Ostrix culture trades in that particular currency. She said, "This will need rematting in 4 months. The wear pattern from Ostrix footwork is not standard." I told her I'd handle it. She nodded once, like a contract being signed, and went back inside. That was the shape of the next several months. Not romance the way the colonial dramas play it. Nothing declared, nothing performed. I rematted the drill room twice. She started leaving her boots by my door instead of hers, which I later learned was an ostrich marker of a space being claimed as safe rather than merely shared. I learned to recognize when her stillness meant peace and when it meant she was holding something in check. And she learned, faster than I expected, that I wasn't going to flinch from either one. The other clerks kept calling it the clerical error, right up until the quarterly review. Assignment Director Priya Okafor called us both in personally, because a compatibility index that low paired against a score that high was, on paper, a statistical anomaly worth investigating for fraud, and because word had reached the regional office that one of the Accord's few remaining decorated ostrich survivors was cohabiting with a records clerk instead of a candidate with a matching profile. Okafor didn't say it unkindly, but she said it plainly. A match this lopsided looked, to anyone reading the file cold, like a waste of a resource the colony could not afford to lose to an ordinary pairing. She had our whole file open on the desk between us, my low, unremarkable numbers, Kyrina's decorated, untouchable ones, and she asked Kyrina directly, in front of me, whether she wanted the match voided before certification, no penalty, no mark on either record. Kyrina didn't look at the file. She looked at me. He built a room for the parts of me the Accord's paperwork never accounted for, she said. He did it without being asked, and he never once mentioned it afterward as though it were owed to him. Your index measures compatibility by species metrics and residency compliance. It has no column for that. I would like it noted for the record that the column should exist. Director Okafor didn't have a box on the form for that either. She wrote it in the margin instead, by hand, and stamped the certification through. We didn't announce anything to the building. Kyrina isn't built for announcements. But she started eating her meals at my counter instead of standing at it, and the other clerks stopped calling it an error, somewhere around the time she began correcting their intake paperwork over my shoulder, more precisely than I ever had. Because apparently a decorated ostrich warrior has opinions about proper filing as well as proper footwork. On the morning the certification became permanent, she set her boots inside my door instead of beside it, which I'd learned by then meant something closer to home than safe. She didn't say the word. She never has. She said, instead, exactly what she'd said the very first day, standing at my counter with the match sheet between us, except this time there was no sheet, and no counter, and no 11 minutes of a stranger explaining my own worth back to me, with more precision than I'd ever managed myself. She said, the index still doesn't measure it. I've stopped waiting for it to. I told her I'd stopped needing it to a long time before she had.